She was the richest woman in the city, but worked as a barista making minimum wage. When a charming delivery driver left her a $50 tip because he thought she desperately needed it, she was completely speechless. He had no idea he had just tipped a billionaire. But when he asked her out for a cheap dinner she supposedly couldn't afford, everything got hilariously complicated. How do you date someone when you're pretending to be poor? The morning sun painted the busy streets of downtown Seattle in golden light. Cars honked impatiently in the rush-hour traffic, while people in expensive suits hurried past with their phones pressed to their ears. In the heart of this bustling financial district stood Wellington Towers, a gleaming skyscraper that stretched 30 floors into the cloudy sky. On the 28th floor, Emma Wellington sat behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars. At 30 years old, she was breathtakingly beautiful in that effortless way only the truly wealthy could achieve. Her honey-blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, framing a face with high cheekbones, bright green eyes, and skin that glowed from expensive treatments. She wore a tailored Armani blazer in navy blue that hugged her slender frame, paired with a white silk blouse and pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. But despite the designer clothes and the commanding view of the city, Emma looked miserable. Miss Wellington, her assistant Marcus, knocked on the glass door. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Richard Blackstone from Blackstone Industries. Emma sighed deeply, her manicured fingers drumming against the desk. "Let me guess, another charming businessman who's mysteriously fallen in love with me after seeing my Forbes profile." Marcus, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, smiled sympathetically. "He did mention 3 times how much he admires your business acumen." "Send him in," Emma said, straightening her blazer with resignation. Richard Blackstone entered like he owned the place. He was handsome in a generic Ken doll way, perfectly styled dark hair, expensive suit, and a smile that looked practiced in mirrors. His eyes immediately went to Emma's figure before meeting her face. "Emma," he said, approaching with arms outstretched, as if they were old friends. "You're even more beautiful than your pictures. That interview in Business Weekly didn't do you justice." Emma remained seated, her expression politely neutral. "Mr. Blackstone, please have a seat." "Call me Rick," he said, settling into the chair across from her and leaning forward with what he probably thought was charm. "I have to say, when my assistant told me the Emma Wellington wanted to meet about a potential partnership, I cleared my entire schedule." "How dedicated of you," Emma replied dryly. "Tell me about your company's sustainability initiatives." For the next hour, Rick talked more about his yacht collection than his business plans. He complimented Emma's adorable concerns about environmental impact and suggested they discuss details over dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city. "I know a great place," he said with a wink. "Very exclusive, the kind of place a woman like you deserves." After he left, Emma slumped in her chair and stared out the window. Down below, she could see ordinary people living ordinary lives, grabbing coffee, laughing with friends, rushing to catch buses. None of them knew she existed, and somehow that seemed wonderful. Marcus appeared with afternoon tea on a silver tray. "Another winner?" he asked, setting down the delicate china cup. "He asked if I wanted to see his private jet collection," Emma said flatly, "before we'd even discussed business." "Ah, a subtle approach." Emma stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Marcus, do you remember when I was little, and I used to sneak down to the hotel kitchens? I remember Chef Marie teaching you to make chocolate chip cookies while your father thought you were in etiquette lessons. Those were the happiest afternoons of my childhood," Emma said softly. "Everyone treated me like just another kid who wanted to help. They didn't care about the Wellington name or the trust fund." She turned to face her assistant. "I want that feeling back." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Emma said, a spark lighting up her green eyes for the first time in months, "that Emma Wellington needs a vacation. A very long vacation." 3 weeks later, Jake Martinez pulled his battered delivery van up to Grind Coffee, a tiny coffee shop squeezed between a laundromat and a used bookstore in the Fremont neighborhood. The shop was about as far from the gleaming downtown towers as you could get, while still being in Seattle. Jake was 32 and had the kind of rugged good looks that came from actual work rather than gym memberships. His dark hair was always slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it, and his brown eyes crinkled at the corners from years of smiling. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Today he wore faded jeans, work boots, and a grey Henley that had seen better days, but still managed to show off his muscular frame. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and he immediately noticed something was different. Behind the counter, instead of Marie, the 60-year-old owner who'd been making coffee here for 15 years, stood a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. This was Emma, though Jake didn't know that. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail with several strands escaping to frame her face. She wore jeans that looked suspiciously expensive, though she'd carefully removed all the designer labels, and a green t-shirt with the coffee shop's logo. She'd traded her heels for white sneakers that were so pristine they practically screamed, "I bought these yesterday." Her flawless makeup had been toned down, but nothing could hide her natural beauty or the way she carried herself with unconscious elegance. Welcome to Grind Coffee," Emma said, staring at the intimidating espresso machine like it might explode. "What can I get for you?" Jake smiled, immediately charmed by her nervous energy. "Just a large black coffee and one of those blueberry muffins if they're fresh." "Right, large black coffee." Emma turned to the machine and stared at it for a long moment. "That's the big button, right?" "Having a rough first day?" Jake asked kindly. Emma laughed, and the sound was like music. "Is it that obvious? I've been here 3 hours, and I've already broken a coffee pot, burned a batch of muffins, and somehow managed to get whipped cream on the ceiling." Jake looked up, and sure enough, there was a small white splatter above the counter. He couldn't help but grin. "Impressive. I'm Jake, by the way. I deliver for most of the restaurants around here, so you'll probably see me a lot." "Emma," she said, finally managing to get coffee into a cup without incident. "And I promise I'll get better at this. Eventually." "No rush," Jake said, pulling out his wallet. "We all start somewhere." As Emma rang up his order, she fumbled with the ancient cash register. The coffee was $2.50, but when Jake handed her a $20 bill, she stared at it like it was written in hieroglyphics. "The change is," she began, then stopped, clearly doing math in her head. $17.50, Jake supplied gently. "Right, I knew that." Emma opened the register and stared at the bills and coins like they were puzzle pieces. After a moment of obvious confusion, she just grabbed a handful of money and thrust it toward Jake. "Here you go." Jake looked down at the bills in his hand and laughed. She'd given him nearly $30 in change. "I think you might have miscounted," he said, trying to hand back the extra money. Emma's cheeks flushed pink. "Oh God, I'm terrible at this." "Marie, that's the owner. She's going to fire me before lunch." "Hey," Jake said softly, "everyone makes mistakes. Here, keep the extra as a tip. Looks like you're working hard." Emma stared at the money in shock. For someone who'd never wanted for anything, the gesture hit her unexpectedly hard. Not because of the amount, $50 was nothing to her, but because of the kindness behind it. This stranger thought she was struggling and wanted to help. "You don't have to," she began. "I want to," Jake said firmly. "Besides, good coffee is worth it." He took a sip and managed not to wince. It was terrible coffee, but something about her earnest effort made it taste better. After Jake left, Emma stood behind the counter holding the $50 tip and feeling something she'd never experienced before, the warmth of genuine kindness from someone who expected nothing in return. The bell chimed again, and Marie bustled in from the back room. She was a round, motherly woman with grey hair and flour-dusted aprons. The kind of person who'd been feeding people for so long, it had become second nature. "How's it going, honey?" Marie asked, then stopped and looked around. "Why is there whipped cream on my ceiling?" Emma followed her gaze and winced. "I may have had a small incident with the cappuccino machine." Marie sighed but smiled. "Let me guess, handsome delivery driver with the kind eyes. How did you—" "He tips everyone like that," Marie said, grabbing a wet cloth to clean the ceiling. "That boy's got a heart bigger than his wallet. Works 3 jobs to support his family, but he still finds ways to help other people." Emma felt something flutter in her chest. 3 jobs? Owns a small delivery service, drives for rideshare on weekends, and helps his cousin with construction work when he can. all so he can send money to his parents and save up to expand his business. Marie shook her head admiringly. That's a good man right there. As Emma watched Marie clean up her mess, she realized she was smiling. For the first time in years, she was genuinely excited about something. Not a business deal or a charity gala, but the possibility of seeing Jake Martinez again. She had no idea that her simple desire to experience normal life was about to turn everything upside down. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake's daily coffee runs became the highlight of Emma's day. Each morning at exactly 9:30, she'd hear his van pull up outside and feel her heart skip a beat. Emma was getting marginally better at the job, though better was relative. She'd only broken 1 coffee pot this week, and yesterday she'd managed to make a latte that Marie said was almost drinkable. But what she lacked in skill, she made up for in enthusiasm and an infectious laugh every time something went wrong. Large black coffee and a blueberry muffin, Jake said as he entered on a rainy Thursday morning. He'd started to look forward to these visits too, though he told himself it was just because Emma's attempts at coffee making were entertaining. Coming right up, Emma said with newfound confidence. She'd actually watched several YouTube videos on espresso machines and had been practicing during slow periods. And before you ask, no whipped cream incidents today. I'm almost disappointed, Jake teased, watching as she competently operated the machine. You're getting too good at this. Emma beamed at the compliment, then felt silly for how much it meant to her. In her real life, people praised her business acumen and her strategic mind. But somehow, Jake thinking she was getting better at making coffee felt more meaningful than any Forbes article ever had. As she handed him his order, their fingers brushed briefly, and Emma felt that flutter again. You know, Jake said, seeming to work up courage, there's a food truck festival this Saturday in Fremont Park. Great music, good eats, very casual. Would you maybe want to check it out? I mean, if you're not busy. Emma's heart soared, then immediately crashed as reality set in. A food truck festival. She'd never been to anything like that in her life. Her weekends usually involved charity galas at 5-star hotels or wine tastings at exclusive clubs. But looking at Jake's hopeful expression, she found herself nodding. I'd love to. Great. Jake's smile was radiant. Fair warning though, it's not fancy, just good food and live music. Very budget-friendly. The way he said budget-friendly with slight embarrassment made Emma's chest tighten. He was worried she might think it wasn't good enough, when in reality it sounded perfect. I love budget-friendly, she said, and meant it. Saturday arrived grey and drizzle-soaked, typical Seattle weather that didn't seem to dampen anyone's spirits at the food truck festival. Emma had spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit, finally settling on jeans, the most expensive jeans money could buy, but jeans nonetheless, a casual sweater and the white sneakers that were finally starting to look less pristine. She found Jake near the entrance and her breath caught. He looked incredible in dark jeans and a blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly damp from the mist. When he spotted her, his face lit up with a smile that made her forget about everything else. You made it, he said, jogging over. I was starting to worry the rain might scare you off. I love the rain, Emma said, which was true. She'd just never experienced it without a driver and an umbrella before. They wandered through the festival, and Emma was enchanted. She'd attended countless outdoor events, but they'd all been meticulously planned affairs with VIP sections and champagne service. This was different. Real people having real fun, the smell of grilled food mixing with the scent of rain-washed air. What looks good? Jake asked as they surveyed the food trucks. Emma was overwhelmed by choices she'd never had to make. In her world, meals were either prepared by private chefs or served at restaurants where the staff knew exactly what she liked. What do you recommend? Well, that Korean BBQ truck is amazing, Jake said, pointing to a colorful vehicle with a long line. And the wood-fired pizza over there is incredible. Oh, and you have to try the gourmet grilled cheese. It's life-changing. Everything sounded foreign and wonderful to Emma. Let's try them all? Jake laughed. I like your enthusiasm, but that might be a lot. How about we start with the Korean BBQ and see how we feel? They joined the line, and Emma watched in fascination as Jake chatted easily with other customers, asking about their recommendations and sharing his own favorites. Everyone seemed to know him, greeting him with genuine warmth. You're popular, Emma observed. Jake shrugged. Small neighborhood. I deliver to most of these people. He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Plus, I might have mentioned I was bringing someone special today. Emma's heart did a little flip. Special? The beautiful, mysterious barista who's been brightening my mornings, Jake said, his cheeks reddening slightly. I may have bragged about you to everyone who'd listen. When they reached the front of the line, the food truck owner, a cheerful Korean woman in her 50s, beamed at Jake. This must be the famous Emma. Jake's been talking about you non-stop. Mrs. Kim, Jake protested, but he was grinning. 2 bulgogi plates with extra kimchi, Mrs. Kim said, already preparing their order. On the house for Jake's special lady. Emma was touched by the gesture, but when Jake tried to pay anyway, she saw him counting bills carefully. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He was calculating whether he had enough money for both meals. Without thinking, she reached for her purse. I can pay for mine, she began. Absolutely not, Jake said firmly, handing over the money. I asked you out, I pay. That's how it works. Emma watched him hand over what was probably a significant portion of his daily earnings and felt simultaneously guilty and deeply moved. When was the last time someone had sacrificed something meaningful for her? They found a spot at a picnic table under a big umbrella, and Emma took her first bite of Korean BBQ. The flavors exploded across her palate, spicy, sweet, tangy, completely unlike anything she'd ever tasted. Oh my God, she said, eyes widening. This is incredible, Jake grinned. Better than fancy restaurant food? Emma, who'd eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants around the world, nodded enthusiastically. So much better. It's so real. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing easily. Jake told her about his delivery business, how he'd started with just his old sedan and had slowly built up to the van. His dream was to expand into catering, maybe open a small restaurant someday. What about you, he asked. What's your dream? Emma paused, a piece of bulgogi halfway to her mouth. Her real dream had always been to prove herself worthy of the Wellington name, to show her father she could run the company as well as any son. But sitting here with Jake, that dream felt hollow. I think, she said slowly, I just want to be happy. Really, genuinely happy. Jake's expression softened. That's a good dream. After lunch, they wandered through the craft booths. Emma was fascinated by everything. Handmade jewelry, local art, organic soaps. She'd bought plenty of artisanal products before, but always through personal shoppers or exclusive boutiques. There was something magical about talking directly to the artists, hearing their stories. At one booth selling hand-knitted scarves, Emma fell in love with a soft blue wool piece that reminded her of Jake's eyes. The price tag said $40, which was nothing to her but probably a stretch for a struggling barista. Jake noticed her admiring it. You should get it. It's perfect for you. It's a little expensive, Emma said, the lie feeling strange on her tongue. Without hesitation, Jake pulled out his wallet. Let me buy it for you. Jake, no. I want to, he said, already handing money to the vendor. You work so hard, and I can tell you don't spend much on yourself. Emma's throat tightened as he wrapped the scarf around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. She'd owned scarves that cost thousands of dollars, but none had ever meant as much as this $40 piece of wool purchased by a man who probably had to choose between gas and groceries. Thank you, she whispered. You're worth it, Jake said simply, and Emma had to look away before she started crying. The afternoon flew by in a blur of live music, terrible dancing. Emma had been classically trained in ballroom dancing but pretended to be as clumsy as Jake, and easy laughter. As the sun began to set through the clouds, they found themselves sitting on a bench overlooking the festival, Emma's head resting on Jake's shoulder. This was perfect, she said softly. Even though it wasn't fancy, Jake asked, and she could hear the insecurity in his voice. Emma lifted her head to look at him. Especially because it wasn't fancy. This was real. You're real. Jake's eyes searched her face, and for a moment Emma thought he might kiss her, but instead he smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Same time next Saturday, he asked. I wouldn't miss it, Emma said, meaning every word. As they parted ways that evening, Emma clutched the blue scarf and realized she was in serious trouble. She was falling for Jake Martinez, and he had no idea who she really was. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of coffee shop shifts and weekend dates that felt like adventures to Emma. Jake took her to places she'd never imagined. Discount movie theaters where they smuggled in candy, free concerts in parks, hiking trails that didn't require expensive equipment. Each experience was a revelation, but with every passing day, the deception became harder to maintain. It started with small things. At the grocery store, Emma automatically reached for organic produce without checking prices, then had to backtrack when she saw Jake's surprised expression. She tipped the pizza delivery guy $20 on a $15 order and had to claim she'd grabbed the wrong bill. When her iPhone cracked, she instinctively started to buy the newest model before remembering that would cost nearly a week's wages for a barista. The close calls were getting closer. One evening, as they walked through Pike Place Market, Emma's personal shopper called. She'd been screening calls all day, but the phone kept ringing. "You should probably answer that," Jake said after the fourth call. "It's probably nothing important," Emma said, but Jake looked concerned. "What if it's an emergency? Family, maybe?" Emma reluctantly answered. "Hello, Miss Wellington, thank goodness," came the familiar voice of Margaret, her personal shopper. "I've been trying to reach you all day. The Valentino samples came in for tomorrow night's charity auction, and I need to know which gown you prefer." Emma's blood went cold. She quickly stepped away from Jake, pressing her hand over the phone. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number," she said loudly, then hung up and immediately blocked the number. Jake frowned. "Wrong number?" "Yeah, some mix-up about designer dresses or something," Emma said with a forced laugh. "Definitely not meant for me." But Jake's expression remained puzzled. "She called you by name, though." "Miss Wellington." Emma's heart pounded. Maybe she misdialed but got my name from caller ID. I don't know how these things work. It was a terrible lie, and they both knew it. But Jake didn't push, which somehow made Emma feel worse. The next morning at the coffee shop, Emma was distracted and clumsy, dropping things and burning milk. Marie finally pulled her aside. "Honey, what's eating at you? You look like you haven't slept." Emma sighed, unable to keep it in any longer. "Marie, what would you do if you cared about someone, but they didn't know the real you?" Marie studied her with wise eyes. "That depends. Is the real you someone worth knowing?" "I don't know anymore," Emma said honestly. "I used to think so, but now, I feel like I've been living behind a mask for so long, I'm not sure what's underneath." "Well," Marie said gently, "maybe it's time to find out." Before Emma could respond, the bell chimed and Jake entered, 2 hours early and looking frazzled. "Emma, thank God you're here," he said, hurrying to the counter. "I need to ask a huge favor." "What's wrong?" Emma asked, immediately concerned. "My sister Rosa. She's having her engagement party tonight, and I'm supposed to bring you. But the restaurant she booked, it's fancy, like really fancy." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "I know you probably don't have anything to wear to a place like that, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, but she's been asking about you for weeks." Emma's heart clenched. "Jake, I could try to explain to my family that it's too expensive, but they've already paid the deposit, and Rosa's been planning this for months." Jake looked miserable. "I'm sorry, I should have given you more warning. We could skip it if you want." Emma thought about Jake's family, whom she'd heard so much about but never met. Rosa, the sister who was getting married to her college sweetheart. Miguel, the younger brother starting his first year at community college. Their parents, who'd immigrated from Mexico and worked 2 jobs each to give their children better opportunities. "What's the restaurant?" she asked. "Canlis," Jake said, wincing. I know. It's ridiculously expensive." But Rosa's fiancé's family insisted, and Emma's heart stopped. Canlis was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Seattle. She'd eaten there dozens of times, usually in the private dining room. The Wellington family had a standing reservation. "I'd love to go," she heard herself say. Jake's face lit up. "Really? You're not worried about the dress code?" Emma thought about the closet in her penthouse apartment, full of gowns worth more than Jake made in a year. "I'm sure I can find something." 3 hours later, Emma stood in front of her walk-in closet, feeling like an imposter in her own life. Rows of designer gowns hung before her, each one costing more than most people's monthly rent. She finally selected a simple black dress by a lesser-known designer, something that looked elegant but not obviously expensive. As her private car pulled up to Jake's apartment building, Emma felt sick with nerves. She'd sent the driver around the block twice while she worked up courage. Jake emerged from the building, and Emma's breath caught. He wore a dark suit that was clearly his best. Not designer, but well-fitted and elegant. His hair was perfectly styled, and he'd shaved carefully. He looked incredibly handsome and completely out of his element. "Wow," he said as he got into the car, his eyes widening at the luxury interior. "This is nice. I borrowed it from a friend," Emma lied smoothly, another lie to add to the growing pile. At Canlis, Emma felt the familiar comfort of fine dining, the discreet service, the impeccable atmosphere, the effortless elegance. But she also saw it through Jake's eyes, the intimidating maitre d', the prices on the menu that made him go pale, the way he studied the place settings like they were puzzles to solve. Jake's family was already seated at a large table, and Emma was struck immediately by how much love filled the space. Rosa was radiant in a simple but beautiful dress, her fiancé David looking at her like she hung the moon. Jake's parents, Maria and Carlos, were dressed in their finest clothes and beaming with pride. Miguel, barely 18, kept stealing glances around the restaurant like he couldn't believe he was there. "Everyone," Jake said, his hand warm on Emma's back. "This is Emma." The warmth of their welcome nearly overwhelmed her. Maria immediately stood to embrace her, and Carlos shook her hand with genuine pleasure. Rosa grabbed her arm and pulled her into the conversation like they'd been friends for years. "Jake talks about you constantly," Rosa said with a grin. "Emma this, Emma that. We were starting to think he'd made you up." "Rosa," Jake protested, but he was smiling. "It's true," Miguel chimed in. "He keeps pictures of you on his phone and shows them to everyone." Emma felt her cheeks warm. "Pictures?" Jake looked embarrassed but pulled out his phone. The photos were candid shots from their dates, Emma laughing at the food truck festival, concentrating on a mini golf putt, making a silly face during their hiking trip. In each one, she looked genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen in any professional photos. "You two are adorable together," Rosa said. "Jake, remember when you said you'd never find someone who understood what it was like to work for everything you have?" Emma's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Carlos leaned forward. "Jake told us how hard you work at the coffee shop, how you're saving every penny. It's good to see young people who understand the value of money." "Dad," Jake said quietly, clearly embarrassed. "No, it's important," Maria added. "Too many young people today expect everything handed to them. But you and Jake, you know what it means to earn your way." Emma felt like she was drowning. Every kind word, every assumption about her character was based on a lie. When the waiter came to take their orders, she watched Jake's face carefully as he scanned the menu, saw the moment he realized the cheapest entree cost more than he probably made in a day. "The salmon looks good," he said carefully. Actually, Emma found herself saying, "I heard the chef's tasting menu is incredible here. My treat, to celebrate Rosa's engagement." Jake's face went white. "Emma, no. That's way too expensive." "I insist," Emma said, and before anyone could protest, she'd ordered the tasting menu for the entire table. The meal that followed was torture. Jake kept reaching for her hand under the table, whispering apologies about the cost. His family was over the moon, talking about how generous she was, how lucky Jake was to find someone so wonderful. Meanwhile, Emma sat there knowing she'd just spent more on dinner than Jake made in 2 weeks, and it meant nothing to her. After dessert, when the family was sharing engagement stories and Jake had stepped away to take a business call, Rosa leaned over to Emma. "Can I tell you something?" Rosa said softly. "I've never seen my brother this happy. Jake's always been the responsible one, you know, taking care of everyone else, never spending money on himself. But with you, he lights up. He's actually talking about the future instead of just surviving day to day." Emma's throat tightened. "Rosa, I know money's tight for both of you," Rosa continued, "but what you two have is special. Real love doesn't care about bank accounts." When Jake returned, his face was troubled. "Everything okay?" Emma asked. "One of my regular clients wants to cancel their contract," he said quietly. "Something about finding a cheaper service. It's about 20% of my monthly income." Emma's first instinct was to fix it. She could make a few calls, use her connections to get Jake more business than he could handle. But she couldn't do that without revealing who she was. "I'm sorry," she said helplessly. Jake squeezed her hand. "It's okay. We'll figure it out. We always do." As they left the restaurant, Emma felt the weight of her deception crushing down on her. Jake's family had welcomed her with open arms, treating her like she was already part of the family. Jake himself was falling in love with someone who didn't really exist. In the car ride home, Jake was quiet. "You're upset about dinner," Emma said. "Not upset," Jake said carefully, "just surprised." "Emma, that meal cost more than I make in 2 weeks. How did you—" "I've been saving," Emma said quickly, "and I wanted to do something special for your family." Jake turned to look at her. "That was your entire savings account, wasn't it?" Emma's silence was answer enough. "God, Emma." Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "You can't do that. You can't spend everything you have just to impress my family." "It wasn't about impressing them," Emma said, "and that much was true. I wanted to make them happy. They're important to you, so they're important to me." Jake pulled the car over and turned to face her fully. "You're incredible, you know that? I've never met anyone like you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of tenderness. Emma kissed him back, pouring all her guilt and longing into the moment. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Emma." Emma's heart soared and shattered simultaneously. "Jake, I know it's crazy," he continued. "We've only known each other a few months. But I've never felt this way about anyone. You're so real, so genuine. In a world full of people trying to be something they're not, you're just you." Emma closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. If only he knew how wrong he was. The next few weeks passed in a haze of increasing anxiety for Emma. Her double life was becoming impossible to maintain, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Jake the truth. Not when he looked at her like she was the most amazing woman in the world. Not when his family had embraced her so completely. Not when she was happier than she'd ever been in her life. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It started on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop. Emma was actually becoming competent as a barista. She could make a decent latte now and had only broken 1 cup all week. Jake had come in for his usual order and they were flirting over the counter when a familiar voice made Emma's blood freeze. "Emma Wellington, what on earth are you doing behind that counter?" Emma turned slowly to see Vivian Hartwell, a prominent Seattle socialite and one of her mother's oldest friends. Vivian was impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit and looked completely out of place in the tiny coffee shop. "I'm sorry," Emma said carefully. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Don't be ridiculous, darling. I've known you since you were in diapers. Your mother is beside herself. You've missed 3 charity board meetings, and no one's seen you at any of the usual places." She looked around the coffee shop with barely concealed disdain. "What is this, some sort of social experiment?" Emma was acutely aware of Jake standing right there, listening to every word. "Mom, I really think there's been a mistake." "Mistake?" Vivian laughed. "Emma, dear, your picture was just in Seattle Metropolitan. Rising business stars under 35, remember? Though I must say, this coffee shop girl look is certainly different from your usual style." Emma felt Jake's eyes on her and couldn't bring herself to look at him. "Vivian, please." Oh, Vivian's eyes lit up with understanding. "Is this for that documentary? The one where rich people pretend to be poor? How deliciously meta of you, though I'm not sure your father would approve of you working in a place like this, even for television." "Ma'am," Jake said quietly, and Emma could hear the confusion in his voice. "I think you really do have the wrong person." Vivian looked at Jake as if noticing him for the first time. "And you are?" "Jake Martinez," he said, extending his hand politely. "I'm Emma's boyfriend," Emma said quickly, the word feeling both true and false in her mouth. Vivian's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like amusement. "Oh my," she said softly. "Oh, this is rich. Emma Wellington, heiress to the Wellington Hotel fortune, dating a—" She looked Jake up and down. "Delivery driver?" Emma felt her world crumbling. "Vivian, stop." "This is better than any soap opera," Vivian continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Does he know who you really are?" About the trust fund, the company, the penthouse apartment worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Jake had gone very still beside the counter. "Emma," he said quietly, "what is she talking about?" Emma finally forced herself to look at him. The confusion in his eyes was already hardening into something else. Hurt, betrayal, the slow dawning of terrible understanding. "Jake, I can explain." "Emma Wellington," Jake said slowly, as if testing the words. "Wellington, like the hotel chain?" Emma's silence was answer enough. Vivian, oblivious to the drama she was causing, continued chattering. "Oh, darling, you simply must bring him to the Hartwell charity auction next week. Can you imagine? A delivery driver at the Seattle Art Museum Gala. How wonderfully democratic of you." "Get out," Emma said quietly. "Excuse me?" "Get out," Emma shouted, her composure finally cracking. "Leave. Now." Vivian huffed, clearly offended. "Well, I never. Your mother will hear about this attitude." She swept out of the coffee shop, leaving devastation in her wake. Emma turned to face Jake, her heart pounding. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Emma opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. All the lies she'd carefully constructed over the past months crumbled to dust. "Yes," she whispered. Jake stumbled backward like she'd hit him. "You're a billionaire." "Jake, please let me explain." "A billionaire," he repeated, his voice getting louder. "You're a fucking billionaire, and you've been pretending to be a struggling barista. I never meant for it to go this far." "How far?" Jake's eyes were blazing now. "How far, Emma? When you let me pay for dinner when I could barely afford it. When you let me worry about you having enough money for groceries. When you let my family think you were just like us." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Jake demanded. "What was this, some kind of game? Rich girl slums it with the poor people for a few months?" "No." Emma stepped toward him, but he backed away. "Jake, I was miserable. Everyone in my life only wanted me for my money, and I just wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for myself." "Loved for yourself?" Jake laughed bitterly. "I don't even know who you are. The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist." "She does exist," Emma said desperately. "Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. I'm still me, Jake." "You're not," Jake said, and his voice broke slightly. "The woman I loved worried about paying rent. She saved every penny. She understood what it meant to work for everything you have. But you," he shook his head, "you've been playing dress-up while I've been breaking my back trying to build a life good enough for you." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. "Jake, please." "Do you know what I did last night?" Jake asked quietly. "I called 3 different banks about getting a loan. I wanted to expand my business, maybe open that catering company I told you about." "You know why?" Emma shook her head, unable to speak. "Because I wanted to be worthy of you. I wanted to be able to give you the life you deserved. I was willing to go into debt, to risk everything I've worked for, because I thought you understood struggle. I thought you valued hard work and determination over money." "I do." "No, you don't," Jake said firmly. "If you did, you wouldn't have lied to me for months. You wouldn't have let me embarrass myself trying to impress you with cheap dates and budget restaurants." "Those weren't embarrassing," Emma said through her tears. "Those were the best days of my life." Jake stared at her for a long moment. "Were they? Or were they just amusing diversions from your real life?" Before Emma could answer, Jake turned and walked toward the door. "Jake, wait," Emma called after him. He paused at the door but didn't turn around. "I can't do this, Emma. I can't be with someone who thinks so little of me that she'd lie about who she is for months. That's not why I lied." "Isn't it?" Jake finally turned back to face her. "You thought I was so shallow, so money-hungry, that I couldn't handle the truth about who you are." "No, I thought you'd see me differently." "I would have," Jake said quietly. "I would have seen you as someone honest enough to trust me with the truth." He left then, the bell chiming softly behind him. Emma sank to her knees behind the counter and sobbed, clutching the blue scarf he'd bought her at the festival. Marie found her there 20 minutes later. "Oh, honey," Marie said softly, kneeling beside her. "I heard the whole thing from the back room." "I ruined everything," Emma whispered. "I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me." Marie helped her to her feet and handed her a tissue. "Maybe. Or maybe you just learned something important about yourself." What's that? Marie smiled sadly. That the woman Jake fell in love with isn't a lie. She's who you really are when all the money and status get stripped away. The question is, are you brave enough to be her for real? Emma spent the next 3 days in her penthouse apartment, alternating between crying and staring at her phone, wanting to call Jake but not knowing what to say. She'd tried going back to her old life, attended a charity board meeting, had lunch with other socialites, even went on a date with another suitable businessman, but everything felt hollow and meaningless. On Thursday evening, Marcus found her sitting on her balcony, still wearing pajamas at 7 p.m. "Miss Wellington," he said gently, "your father has been trying to reach you." "Tell him I'm sick," Emma mumbled. "I did. Yesterday and the day before. He's threatening to come over here himself if you don't take his call." Emma sighed and accepted the phone. "Hi, Dad." "Emma, what the hell is going on? I've been hearing the strangest rumors about you working in some coffee shop, and Vivian Hartwell called your mother with the most ridiculous story." "It's not a story," Emma said quietly. "It's all true." There was a long silence. "You've been working as a barista. Why on earth would you do such a thing?" Emma thought about how to explain it to her father, a man who'd built an empire but had never struggled a day in his life. "Because I wanted to know who I was without the Wellington name. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You are a Wellington. That's not something you can just take off like a coat." "Isn't it?" Emma asked. "Dad, when was the last time someone loved you for something other than your money?" Another silence. "Emma, are you having some sort of breakdown?" "Maybe," Emma said honestly, "or maybe I'm finally waking up." After she hung up, Emma sat on her balcony and watched the sun set over Elliott Bay. In the distance, she could see the neighborhood where Jake lived, where real people were having real lives. She thought about Rosa's engagement party, about how genuinely happy Jake's family had been. When was the last time she'd been around that kind of authentic joy? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emma, this is Rosa Martinez, Jake's sister. Can we talk?" Emma's heart jumped. She immediately called the number. "Rosa? Hi, Emma, I got your number from Jake's phone. Don't tell him. Can you meet me for coffee? Not at your workplace, somewhere neutral." An hour later, Emma sat across from Rosa in a small cafe in Capitol Hill. Rosa looked tired but determined. "Jake told me what happened," Rosa said without preamble. "About who you really are." Emma winced. "I'm so sorry, Rosa. I never meant to lie to your family." "I'm not here to make you feel worse," Rosa interrupted. "I'm here because my brother is miserable, and frankly, so are you, from the looks of it." Emma touched her face self-consciously. She'd tried to cover the dark circles with makeup, but apparently hadn't succeeded. "Jake's been working non-stop since Tuesday," Rosa continued, 18-hour days. "He's driving himself into the ground because that's what he does when he's hurting. He works until he can't think anymore." "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I never wanted to hurt him." "I know," Rosa said softly. "Emma, can I ask you something? When you were with Jake, pretending to be someone else, were you happy?" Emma thought about it. "Happier than I'd ever been in my life. And was the way you felt about Jake real?" "Completely real," Emma said without hesitation. "I love him, Rosa. I know I don't deserve to, but I do." Rosa leaned back in her chair. "You know what Jake told me about you? He said you were the first person he'd ever met who saw him for who he really was, not what he could provide. He said you loved him for his kindness, his work ethic, his dreams, not because he could take care of you financially." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "That's all true, so why didn't you trust him with the truth?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was scared. Everyone else in my life has wanted me for my money. I thought if Jake knew, he'd either see dollar signs or run away completely. And instead, you made the choice for him," Rosa pointed out. "You decided he couldn't handle the truth." "I know," Emma said miserably. "I know I messed up." Rosa reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. "My brother's not perfect, but he's the most genuine person I know. If you'd told him the truth from the beginning, do you really think he would have cared about your money?" Emma thought about Jake's reaction to her generous tips, his concern when he thought she'd spent her savings on his family's dinner, the way he'd worried about her working too hard at the coffee shop. No, she admitted. He probably would have been more worried about me using him. Exactly, Rosa said. Jake doesn't want your money, Emma. He wants your heart. But he needs to know he has the real thing, not some performance. It's too late, Emma said. He'll never forgive me. Maybe not, Rosa agreed. But you won't know unless you try. The question is, are you willing to be completely honest this time? No more games, no more pretending. Emma thought about it. Being completely honest meant admitting not just her wealth, but her fears, her loneliness, her desperate desire to be loved for herself. It meant being vulnerable in a way she'd never been before. Yes, she said finally, I'm willing to try. Rosa smiled. Good, because I might have an idea. The next Saturday morning, Jake was loading his van for deliveries when his phone rang. It was an unknown number with a business name he didn't recognize. Wellington Catering Services. Hello? He answered cautiously. Mr. Martinez? This is Patricia Williams from Wellington Catering. We have a large event this afternoon, and our regular delivery service just cancelled on us. We heard you might be available for emergency catering delivery. Jake frowned. I don't usually do catering deliveries, but I suppose I could. Excellent. The pay is $500 for about 4 hours of work. The address is Myrtle Edwards Park, Pavilion B. Can you be there at 2 p.m.? $500 was more than Jake made in a week. I'll be there. At 2 p.m. sharp, Jake pulled up to the park pavilion and was surprised to find it mostly empty except for one person. Emma. She stood near a single table set for two, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. The same blue as the scarf she'd worn on their first real date. Her hair was in a ponytail and she wore minimal makeup. She looked nervous and beautiful and completely unlike the wealthy heiress he'd learned she was. There's no catering job, is there? He said as he approached. No, Emma admitted. I'm sorry for lying to get you here, but I didn't think you'd come if I just asked. You're right, I wouldn't have. Jake crossed his arms. What do you want, Emma? Emma took a shaky breath. I want to tell you the truth. All of it. Not because I have to, but because you deserve it. Jake waited, his expression guarded. My name is Emma Catherine Wellington, she began. I'm 30 years old, and I'm the sole heir to Wellington Hotels International. My net worth is approximately $2.3 billion. Jake winced at the number, but didn't interrupt. I've never had a real job before the coffee shop, Emma continued. I've never worried about money. Never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Never worked for anything in my life. By all rights, I should be a spoiled, entitled brat who doesn't understand the real world. She took another breath. But I was miserable, Jake. Completely, utterly miserable. Everyone in my life wanted something from me. Business deals, social connections, access to my money. I'd been on dozens of dates with men who saw dollar signs when they looked at me. I felt like I was suffocating. Jake's expression had softened slightly, but he still didn't speak. So I decided to try being normal. Just for a little while. I thought I'd work at the coffee shop for a few weeks, maybe make some regular friends, and then go back to my real life. Emma's voice broke slightly, but then I met you. She looked directly at him then, her green eyes bright with tears. Jake, you saw me. Not my money, not my connections, not what I could do for you. You saw a clumsy barista who couldn't work a cash register, and somehow you thought I was worth your time, worth your kindness, worth your love. Emma, let me finish, she said quickly. I was scared to tell you the truth because I thought you'd leave. Everyone always wants something from me, and I thought if you knew how much money I had, you'd either see me as a walking ATM or be so intimidated you'd run away. So I kept lying, even when it got harder and harder. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But the worst part is that by not trusting you with the truth, I proved I didn't know you at all. Because the Jake Martinez I fell in love with, the man who tips struggling baristas, who works 3 jobs to support his family, who bought me a $40 scarf because he thought I deserved something beautiful, that man would never want me for my money. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this now? Because I realized something, Emma said. The woman you fell in love with, she wasn't fake. She was me without all the barriers I've built up over the years. She was who I am when I'm not scared, when I'm not protecting myself, when I'm just happy. She gestured to the table behind her. I made lunch. peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because that's about the extent of my cooking skills. I brought grocery store cookies and gas station coffee. It's terrible food, but it's honest food. Just like I want to be honest with you. Jake looked at the simple spread and couldn't help but smile slightly. You made PB&J? I had to ask the guy at the deli counter how to do it, Emma admitted. Apparently, you're supposed to put the jelly on both pieces of bread so it doesn't get soggy. Who knew? Despite himself, Jake laughed. Emma, I know you probably can't forgive me, Emma said quickly. I know I hurt you and lied to you, and I know trust isn't something you can just get back. But I want you to know that every moment we spent together was real for me. Every laugh, every conversation, every time you held my hand, that was the most real I've ever been in my life. She took a step closer to him. I love you, Jake. Not the version of me you fell in love with, but the real me loves the real you. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life being that honest person with you. Jake stared at her for a long moment. What about your world? Your family? Your responsibilities? My world is empty without you in it, Emma said simply. As for my family and responsibilities, I'm still figuring that out. But I know I want to use what I have to help people, the way you do. Maybe we could do it together. Emma, Jake said softly, I was falling in love with a barista who was struggling to make ends meet. How do I reconcile that with the reality of who you are? Emma's heart sank, but she forced herself to nod. I understand if you can't. I just needed you to know that she was real. That what we had was real. Jake was quiet for a moment, then asked, that night at Canlis, when you paid for everyone's dinner, was that really your life savings? Emma shook her head. That was about 15 minutes of my annual interest income. Jake laughed despite himself. Jesus, Emma. It's not the money, Jake interrupted. I mean, it is. But not the way you think. He ran his hands through his hair. Do you know what I was thinking that night? I was thinking about how generous you were, how you'd give up everything you had for people you barely knew. That's what I fell in love with. Your heart. Emma felt a spark of hope. Jake, the woman I love, would work at a coffee shop not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand what it was like. The woman I love would be terrified of being vulnerable, but do it anyway because it was right. Jake stepped closer to her. The woman I love would make terrible peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because she wanted to be honest with me. Emma's tears were flowing freely now. Does that mean... It means I'm still mad at you for lying, Jake said, but his voice was gentle. And it means we have a lot to figure out. But it also means I love you too, Emma. The real you. Emma threw her arms around him, and Jake held her tight. They stood there in the empty pavilion, holding each other and crying and laughing all at once. So what happens now? Emma asked when they finally broke apart. Jake smiled and gestured to the table. Now we eat terrible sandwiches and figure out how to make this work. It won't be easy, Emma warned. My father's going to hate you just on principle, and the media will be a nightmare. And there are going to be people who say you're only with me for my money. Let them talk, Jake said, surprising her. I know why I'm with you, and so do you. That's what matters. Emma looked at this incredible man who was willing to take on her complicated world just to be with her. I have one more confession. Jake raised an eyebrow. Oh no. What now? I may have bought a catering company this morning. Wellington Catering Services. I was thinking we could run it together if you're interested. Equal partners. Jake stared at her. You bought a catering company. I wanted to invest in your dreams, Emma said nervously, but only if you want to. We could sell it if... Jake kissed her then, cutting off her nervous rambling. Emma Wellington, he said against her lips, you are completely insane. Is that a yes? That's a yes to everything, Jake said. To the catering company, to figuring this out together, to terrible sandwiches and honest conversations, and whatever comes next. Emma smiled through her tears. Even if whatever comes next includes charity galas and business meetings and probably some very awkward dinners with my father. Especially then, Jake said. Though I'm definitely wearing my delivery uniform to the first charity gala. Emma laughed. Deal. But I get to introduce you as my partner in every sense of the word. Deal, Jake agreed, then picked up one of the sandwiches. Now let's see just how bad these really are. As they sat at their simple table in the empty pavilion, eating terrible sandwiches and planning their future together, Emma realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Someone who loved her, not despite who she was, but because of it. And Jake had found someone who saw his dreams not as cute ambitions, but as plans worth investing in. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected, but it was real. And after months of pretending, real was all they needed. 6 months later, the grand opening of Martinez Wellington Catering was held not in some fancy hotel, but in the same park pavilion where Emma had finally told Jake the truth. The guest list was an eclectic mix of Jake's family and friends, Emma's business associates who were still adjusting to her new life choices, and half of Fremont neighborhood. Emma stood behind the serving table, wearing jeans and a company t-shirt, her hair in a ponytail and her sleeves rolled up. She was ladling soup into bowls and chatting with customers like she'd been doing it her whole life. "Emma," called Mrs. Kim from the Korean BBQ truck, "this butternut squash soup is incredible." "You made this?" "Jake did," Emma called back proudly. "I'm still working on not burning water." Jake appeared beside her, carrying a fresh tray of his signature grilled cheese sandwiches. She's being modest. She perfected the seasoning blend. After only burning 3 batches, Emma added with a grin. They worked together seamlessly now, Jake handling the complex cooking, while Emma managed the business side and did the simpler prep work. It had taken months to find their rhythm, but they'd discovered that Emma's business acumen and Jake's culinary skills made them formidable partners. "This is amazing," Rosa called from a nearby table where she was sitting with her new husband David. "You two are going to be booked solid within a month." She was right. Word had spread quickly about the catering company that served gourmet food at reasonable prices while treating their staff like family. They already had bookings through the spring. Emma's father, Charles Wellington, stood somewhat awkwardly near the dessert station, still adjusting to his daughter's new life choices. He wore a business suit to what was clearly a casual event, but he was trying. "The profit margins on this operation are actually quite impressive," he said to Jake, who was refilling the coffee station. "Thank you, sir," Jake replied politely. He and Charles were still figuring each other out, but there was mutual respect growing between them. "And Emma seems happy," Charles added, watching his daughter laugh with Mrs. Kim about something. "She is," Jake confirmed. "We both are." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose that's what matters most." As the afternoon wound down and the last customers were finishing their meals, Emma and Jake found themselves sitting at the same table where they'd shared terrible sandwiches 6 months earlier. "So," Jake said, taking her hand, "any regrets about giving up the penthouse lifestyle?" Emma looked around at the scene, Rosa and David sharing dessert, Miguel helping clean up tables without being asked, Marie from the coffee shop deep in conversation with Emma's assistant Marcus about opening a second location, Jake's parents teaching Charles how to play dominoes. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "Even though we're probably going to smell like grilled onions for the rest of our lives." Emma laughed, especially because of that. Jake squeezed her hand. "I have something for you." "Jake, we agreed no gifts until the business is profitable." "It's not that kind of gift," Jake said, pulling out a small velvet box. Emma's breath caught. "Jake, I know we haven't talked about this specifically," Jake said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful solitaire ring, "but I also know I want to spend the rest of my life making terrible coffee and great food with you." Emma stared at the ring, tears filling her eyes. "It's perfect. It's not some fancy designer ring," Jake said nervously. "I know you're probably used to—" Emma silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect because it's from you," she said against his lips. "Yes, obviously yes." As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma realized her journey from miserable heiress to happy entrepreneur was complete. She'd found love, purpose, and most importantly, herself. "So what do you think?" Jake asked as they sat there admiring the ring. "Small wedding at the community center, or are you going to want the full Wellington treatment?" Emma considered this. "What if we did both? Small ceremony with just family and friends, but then a huge reception where we cater our own wedding. Show off what Martinez Wellington Catering can do." Jake grinned. "I love the way you think, partner." "I love you too, partner." As the sun set over Elliott Bay and their friends and family continued celebrating around them, Emma and Jake sat holding hands and planning their future. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was real, honest, and built on love rather than pretense. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. Real wealth isn't in money, but in the connections we make and the love we share. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take off the mask and let people see who you really are. You might be surprised by who loves you for it.